Hello and welcome to episode 3 of season 2 of Media Musings. I see we currently have Critical Cripple and Galda Scummer in the chat. Hello to you and whoever may be lurking or watching it in the future. So, the last hour on the Asterix and Obelix stream, as usual, these Romans were crazy, and now the French are revolting.
Yeah. The French are revolting, and it's nice and fitting that there's been a break in between, because there's a break in between when you go to the theatre to see Les Mis as well.
Yeah.
And it is sorely needed, let's be honest.
Yeah.
So anyway, straight in, where did we leave off last time?
Okay, so where we left off was Thénardier got nabbed by Javert after attempting to mug Jean Valjean, who escaped out a window in the tumult.
Yeah.
Well, Marius did nothing and just watched, being the audience point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it does irritate me that Marius gets so much quote-unquote screen time, because he's...
Yeah. Marius is useless.
He's useless. He's not horrible in that he's mean or anything. He's just... it's a trek to get through it, because he just stares gormlessly.
Basically, if it's possible to have the opposite of agency, Marius has it.
I do like your concept of negative agency.
Yeah, Marius has negative agency.
Yeah.
And of course, since we are talking about Les Miserables, there will be plenty of, because 19th century literary tropes.
So many literary tropes.
And especially since we're getting on, into the second, half, there will be more topical storms brewing on the horizon.
So do you forecast topical storms, Mr. Weatherman?
Yes. I will also say, because of the way that the plot is structured, it is very difficult to have a coherent discussion about Les Mis.
Yeah. It's one of those you'd have to go thematically or character by character to have something resembling a coherent discussion.
Yeah, but even going character by character, when the character plot lines cross, you're gonna have to double back and okay, this is where
this person is coming from. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because of the way the point of view shifts throughout the book.
Yeah.
It's got that same feel, and this is something that was done very well in history, and in Gothic literature. It's usually done vaguely well. The most famous example is Dracula. Yeah. If anyone's ever read Dracula the book, it's not a straight plot. You're basically given all these different extracts of different points of view and newspaper clippings.
Yeah.
And it really builds the suspense in the structure.
Yeah.
And it feels almost like this is a very similar structure to that, in that you're being given just enough from each point of view to build a coherent story. So yes, because 19th century literary tropes.
Yeah.
Although Dracula was a bit of a trendsetter in that one. So
yeah. And as far as I'm aware, I actually haven't read Dracula. It's on my list. It's on my ever increasing list. I I am very well aware that Dracula leans super hard into the sort of found footage.
Yeah, no, it really
trope.
does. It's very much you follow the characters picking up clues as they go along.
Yeah. And
yeah, it's an odd one.
I'm just gonna set like found footage as a literary trope aside for a future topic.
Yeah, definitely. Otherwise, we'll be on it for a long time. Because it appears in, doesn't it appear in some Heinlein and in some let's see, Lovecraft as well.
Yeah. It's pretty much, it's very much a 19th century literary trope, is the found footage device.
Yeah, Lovecraft. I know Lovecraft loves it.
Victor Hugo leans into it slightly in Les Mis, but not as hard as most others.
Yeah, I think the point I'm making is more the fact that he switches points of view feels a bit like it exists on the periphery of the found footage trope.
Well, and he does go a bit, he does delve slightly into the found footage trope, because he will say police documents, corroborated this, and
Well, that's his entire thing, isn't it? He's claiming that he's put this story together after the fact.
Yeah.
So it is the origin of found footage, is Les Mis.
Yeah.
When it's not in a sort of horror type thing, but then before then it's definitely Dracula that does it that way.
Yeah. So at the cripes. So as after the hullabaloo at the Gorbin house, because there's a charming little story earlier where he goes through his little chapters to just kind of set things up, where we learned that the Gorbin house had been had recently had originally been owned by a pair of lawyers who had to legally change their names because their names sounded so much like the French words for crow and fox. It's just a little amusing anecdote.
Oh yeah.
And there is one thing that I will have to say that I usually don't say this for most works. Like if you find a good translation, it, in my opinion, it serves just as well as the original. Usually, like for casual enjoyment. But I will say, in the case of Les Mis, it would probably be better if you read it in French, because he does use a lot of puns.
Yeah, I will say with translations, the thing is the art of translation has been lost for the last few decades. Yeah. So most translations you find of classic literature are aged now, and they're only just beginning to bring out new versions. Again, and that are really hitting the mainstream. And honestly, some of the translations, I work primarily in translations as an academic.
Yeah.
Like, as an academic, I work in translation and I very rarely, but the thing is, you kind of get a nose for when should I go look at what the original says. Sometimes translations can be really jarring. So I think it's, whoever came up with the idea of getting translations in such a way where you've got the original text on one side and the translation there was a genius.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. Not only can you learn the original language from it if you're trying, you can also double check word translations, because you'd be surprised how often translating something and it just doesn't carry across into the target language at all, or the word the translators picked. And the problem is translation is not without its biases. And translators are not without biases, and that's not usually a problem as long as they declare them. But you can't read a translation uncritically.
Yeah.
You know, if I translate a poem, I'm going to translate it differently to how you do it, or how, you know, Joe Blogs down the street will do it, or anyone else, because we all have different things. If you know, there was a great example given for the first time a woman translated I want to say the Iliad into English.
Yeah.
Was it the Odyssey? Might be both. And one of the things she came out and said was, do you know how many times in historical translations women have been described as whores, prostitutes, in really problematic language?
Yeah.
And it doesn't hold up when you look at the original.
Yeah.
And that's just one extreme example of it. But it can be things like, you know, if I translate to you, particular tones come through in writing that's very subjective. Like you might, the story from last time of, you know, kids being hidden away in a hollow horse.
Yeah.
I will tell that story as it's a nod to mythology, so I'll give it a bit more gravitas. But it's also just cute. So when I write it, it's going to be cute.
Actually, we're about to get to the elephant scene.
Yeah. So when I write it, it's cute.
Yeah.
When someone else writes it, it might be heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You know, it might be, someone else might write it as they are in the wrong and therefore will give a certain tone to that translation.
Yeah.
And we're all working from the same source text. And that does come across a lot in translations. You have to be very careful about not taking translations blindly.
Yeah. So I do have a feeling that is slightly different when we're talking about contemporary translations.
The thing about contemporary translations is you have to have an understanding of the relationship between the two languages and their relevant cultures.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's say in modern, a modern hypothetical example, if I'm taking a story about something in the Russian Revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm translating that into British English.
Yeah.
For a British audience, I'm going to translate that very differently than I would if I was translating it for an American audience. Yeah. Or an American would translate it very differently. And there'd probably be a lot more suspense because there's a lot more baggage between America and Russia than America and Britain, as an example.
And there are, you know, even in the best cases, there are, you know, little linguistic hiccups.
There are, and the thing is as well,
are somewhat unavoidable.
Unless you are transliterating, you're going to have serious issues. If something's written in a form of poetry rather than prose, you've got to decide how to show that as well, or whether you're going to try with that. That's why a lot of translations of classical texts, you'll get prose versions, you'll get poetry versions where there's been an attempt to make it poetry, but it's not the same poetic structure. Sometimes they'll try and keep the structure. It's very different.
And at least in the translation I've read.
Yeah.
There are little bits of poetry interspersed, like when a character like sings a rhyming couplet or something. Mm-hmm. And what this translator did was they left the poem in its original French, then put an asterisk, and at the bottom of the page they put the what it would translate to.
Yeah, so you can get an idea of the way it sounds without affecting the words
Yeah.
and the understanding. So that's a good way of doing it. I mean, the famous example is the Socratic dialogues. Socrates wrote, well, Socrates didn't write, Plato wrote.
Yeah.
But Plato wrote down everything Socrates said, and these were essentially in a lecture format.
Yeah.
They were I said, he said, you know, there were conversations, but they were written originally in a prose format, like a story. You will see some translations of these dialogues written as a play.
Yeah.
Where it's, you know, Socrates : what said, X person : what said.
Yeah.
Because it's just easier to read it that way.
Yeah.
You don't lose anything in the meaning. What you lose is all the extra prose and filler around it.
Yeah.
The main point's there, and it's a way of highlighting that method of discussion that's going on.
And
so, you know, different stroke for different folks.
And to bring it back to Les Mis, like the particular linguistic hiccup I was referencing is because this is a this is a novel about the revolutionary period of France, where the social order is kind of chaotic, especially in the last half of the novel, which ties more into the revolutionary themes. There are instances where people are like, "Oh, do you refer to, X person as two?" Because two, yes, in French, two is the singular you, but it's also the informal you.
Mm-hmm.
But English doesn't have any differentiation in the second person pronoun. Yeah. So in this translation, it's do you refer to X as thou, or call me thou, and which to a modern reader actually makes it seem more archaic and somewhat formal.
Yeah. But it shows a lot about the culture, because it's kind of the difference between calling someone Mr. and calling someone Sir.
Yeah.
Is probably the equivalent of,
Yeah.
Or calling someone by their last name and calling someone Sir. Or even first name and Sir. Because that occurs in a lot of European and Northern European languages as well. It occurs in Russian as well. And I think English is the only language that I actually speak, and I speak a fair few in bits, where that's only got one form of you. Although don't quote me on that. I think German might. Then again, German's one of those where, my German's not good enough to be able to comment on that. But there's
but English is kind of an unholy eldritch abomination stitched together of mangled other dialects.
Jeff, I want that quote on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I just...
Yeah.
Oh, Socrates was a lovely little thinker, but a bugger when he's pissed.
Yeah. So anyways...
It's true.
So we've spent 20 minutes talking about
translation and
structure and translation. So let's get into the plot and the themes.
Yeah.
So Gavroche shows up after everything's gone off, and finds that no one's there. And he was somewhat introduced earlier in the novel, but it's more through an essay rather than an actual introduction that other characters actually get, where Victor Hugo what's the word, introduces the concept of the gamin to the audience.
Mm.
There, he does make rather liberal use of the term street Arab. I'm pretty sure that's insensitive now.
Yeah.
But so in terms, Gavroche is presented as the epitome, the epitome of this gamin archetype. Think very he is a street urchin who basically, he is a forgotten son of Paris.
Mm.
Your artful dodger.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, he's very much your artful dodger with a little dash of Jack Sparrow thrown in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's very kindly for a kid who's been through so much, which he clearly has. He's very sweet. He's a sweet kid.
And we learned that he had been essentially left to run wild in the streets of Paris because Mrs. Thénardier only had enough love in her heart for two people in the entire world, and that was her two daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And gonna skip a little bit because we're just gonna follow Gavroche for a little bit right now. And because 19th century literary tropes, Gavroche runs into a couple of kids who I think Monty Python might have something to say about us selling t-shirts.
Yeah. Yeah, just a little bit.
But so Gavroche meets these two children, one who's about 10, one who's about 6-ish, that we, the audience, learn are secretly his younger brothers, though he doesn't know this. And he never finds it out. It is literally just, the fact that they are, related to him, though he doesn't know it, is literally just to fulfill a literary trope.
Mm-hmm.
And also because 19th century literary tropes, these two kids have a tie with Marius. That's his name. He's so useful that I forget, or he's so useless that I forget his name. But to Marius through Marius's grandfather, Monsieur Gillenormand, because basically, this lady was under the protection, financial provision of Mr. Gillenormand, and her kids get the pox or tuberculosis or something and die. But because she's not caring for kids anymore, her financial situation is, in more dire straits. So she basically gets the kids off Mrs. Thénardier because they were about the same age as the kids that, she lost, essentially buys/adopts them and then raises them in a fairly comfortable, middle-ish class style. And we learned that this lady gets swept up in a police raid, and while the kids are out playing in the yard, and when they go back into the house, there's no one there, and they are told to, seek out X person at X street and get lost in Paris because Paris is a labyrinth. And especially more so in the mid-19th century.
And we promptly get even more description of Paris and its sewers and
no, actually no. Wait, no. Not at this point. We get the description of the sewers later.
This book,
Yeah.
I decided I was gonna, because you'll be aware if you saw the first one, I haven't read it. I decided I was gonna try and listen to the Audible book. 60 odd hours.
Yeah.
So I put it on double speed and let it run. So 30 odd hours. Which means that and I did finish it, but that means that my perception of this book is a bit jumbled because I listened to it at double speed.
Yeah.
So if I get plot points mixed up, that's probably why. And I was sort of on and off because I'm good, but I'm not good enough to sit and listen to Les Mis for 30 hours.
And of course, plot points will be slightly out of order because we've got to jump around a bit because even following characters makes us jump around a bit.
Yeah.
And
the book's just
and the book itself jumps around a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I don't recommend listening to the audiobook if you can help it. Obviously, it's a great accessibility tool, but I don't recommend listening to it unless you're going to sit and take notes because you will get lost and confused.
Yeah, especially considering the theme of multiple names.
Yeah. Oh, nightmare. But yeah, that's just my.
Though there is an interesting parallel that I didn't think of before, where between Jean Valjean and Thénardier, because they both go through multiple names.
Yeah.
Jean Valjean, as basically continually reinventing himself on his path towards redemption. Thénardier, it's because he's constantly running scams.
Yeah. It's one of those, isn't it, where's the line between, where's the moral line in that? When's it acceptable and when's it not? And it's an interesting, definitely interesting.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay. Actually, cripes. Hold on. So we're actually gonna have to. So I jumped ahead a little bit.
See, this is what happens.
Yeah. This is what happens. So, anyways, after this, so after this, everyone getting caught at the house and before this upcoming elephant scene, we see Gavroche, who is hanging out in this alley near Monsieur Mabeuf's house, and he comments that him and his housekeeper, he comments to himself that him and his housekeeper's names are fit for a penny farce.
Yeah, which is an interesting comment, but yeah.
And Monsieur Mabeuf is this, lowly old, he's a botanist. And he had been interested in trying to figure out how to grow indigo in France. Because indigo is actually, at the time, a fairly valuable plant because it's used to make blue dyes.
Mm-hmm.
But his experiments in his backyard haven't been going very well. So he's run on hard times, and he's begun to have to sell his possessions. He's at this point he's down to eating just like a bit of mutton and an egg, like for his meals. And his housekeeper, and the creditors are starting to come knocking, and they're like, yeah, we can't sell you, we can't sell to you anymore because your credit's not as good as it used to be.
Yeah, hang on.
Okay. Yeah. So, anyways, we get treated to this bit of melodrama through Gavroche's eyes, and he settles down into a nook, between in a hedgerow, and with the Mabeuf's backyard on one end and an alley in the other, and Mabeuf, goes to take a nap on the stone bench, and meanwhile in the alley, Jean Valjean runs into Montparnasse, who is one of the ringleaders of the gang that Thénardier runs with. The name of the gang is Patron Minette. And Montparnasse decides to try and mug Jean Valjean. And Jean Valjean overpowers Montparnasse because he's ridiculously strong. It's one of his few main traits. And then delivers him like this lengthy sermon about how you need to go on the straight and narrow, because living the life of a crook and a thief, while it may seem easy, will just earn you more pain in the hard run, or more hard work in the long run, because I know I've been in the galleys, essentially. He gives a long description of what your life will be like in French prison, to try and scare Montparnasse straight. And then, because he's Jean Valjean, gives him his purse anyways. Now, Gavroche, so Jean Valjean does the lawful good thing, defends himself non-lethally, and then just, gives a lecture to try and scare him straight, and then gives up his purse anyways. Gavroche does the chaotic good thing by stealing the purse, pickpocketing the purse off Montparnasse, and leaves it by Monsieur Mabeuf, and will you know what, Hissy's not back, so I'm gonna continue on with Monsieur Mabeuf, and we'll double back to Gavroche in the elephant scene when she returns. So Monsieur Mabeuf wakes up, sees the purse, seemingly that fell from heaven. And while he is a studier of demonology and had previously mistaken Eponine for a goblin or gremlin, and when he told her where Marius is now living, he takes this purse, and he turns it into the law as lost. And his station continues to deteriorate. Things begin to start looking up for him when the other fellows of the botany society that he's a member of notice that things aren't going well for him, and get him a get him an audience with some government, with essentially like the head of the university or some other big important person who could really turn things around for him by, arranging a stipend. Unfortunately, the day he gets that meeting, his housekeeper, falls ill, and he is forced to sell not only his prized collection of, old and rare books, but also the copper plates that he used to print his best-selling book on the flora of some region of France. And unfortunately, he is unable to pay the pawnbroker back to, retrieve these copper plates, which, because of how printing worked at the time, without those plates, you can't really print more copies of the book. And so the pawnbroker sells them for scrap, and they eventually end up getting melted into pots and pans. And so I'm going to So, basically things continue going downhill for this poor, botanist, who's actually more of an intriguing character in my opinion than Marius. But of course, Marius is the designated love interest for Cosette. And of course, he's, the bourgeoisie who gets converted into revolutionary ideals. So he's, of course, he's the point of view character for most of this half of the book, despite his despite him being a complete black hole of agency. And cripes. Hey, you're back.
Hey. I'm back. Yeah, sorry about that. Someone at the door.
So yeah, I held off on the elephant scene by describing Monsieur Mabeuf's arc a bit.
Poor man.
Which we will put a pin in, because when everything comes to a head at the barricade, I left off before then.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, anyways, after Gavroche gives him, leaves him this purse that he pickpocketed off Montparnasse, and of course, Babeuf does the lawful stupid thing and turns it into the cops' lost, because, it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we go back to Gavroche. And Gavroche, runs into these kids and takes them under his wing. Starts like he tells them he has a place by the Bastille and that they can shelter from the rain. And on the way, he gets them he stops by a baker's stall and gets them gets a loaf of bread for the three of them to split. And he says, he makes a point of getting the good white bread and instead of the coarse, rough rye bread.
Mm.
The well flour, the well ground bread. And also, cuts it into three pieces and takes the smallest for himself and gives the larger two to the two boys. And on the way, to the elephant, he runs into Montparnasse, who is, if I remember right, he's the member of Patron Minette who's a bit queer-coded.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, he's essentially the archetype of the dandy thief, and is a bit of a bastard. But yeah, he's obviously queer-coded. Like, even for French literature, he is queer-coded.
Yeah.
And of course, Montparnasse, tells Gavroche about this encounter he had where, he got the, he got, like, he went to mug someone, this old man, and, all he, got who, subdued him, then gave him a lecture and his purse. And then Gavroche pipes in with, yeah, and I bet when you turned to walk away, the purse was gone. Because Gavroche just has no sense of self-preservation and just sasses everyone because he's Gavroche. But Montparnasse doesn't really seem to clock on that it was, Gavroche is having fun at him. And says, well, I'm staying at the Elephant. There's no porter, but, if you come to visit, just ask for Gavroche. And so he takes the kids to the Elephant and borrows a ladder to help them get up inside it, and lights a little what's called a cellar rat. It's essentially like a fuse covered in like paraffin, and lights it, and takes shows them around and escorts them into this mesh cage inside this elephant that was put there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so in this plaster elephant that was put there by Napoleon. Fun fact, the elephant actually was a real thing. Originally Napoleon was going to essentially make a big bronze statue of an elephant, and he got the plaster and wooden mold completed for the casting, and then money ran out and he was deposed, and so for a while there was this big plaster and wood elephant just outside the ruins of the Bastille for a while. But Gavroche takes them into this mesh enclosure, and he said, explaining that he got them from the Jardin des Plantes, or essentially a zoo / what's the word? Menagerie. He says, of the mesh wire that these came from he says of the blanket, I took it from the monkeys. And he says of the straw mat that I took it from the giraffe, but they didn't mind. I explained to them that they were for the elephant.
Yeah. It's a sweet little joke. It's a great setup.
Yeah. And so he he tells them to, shut their peepers. And of course, throughout this interaction, he's teaching them how to speak, street slang, because they're talking, proper, because they're poor middle class kids who got caught up in situations beyond their control. And, he's teaching them how to speak like how he speaks. It's like, what about the cops? We don't say cops, we say bobbies. It's we don't say head, we say nut.
So it's learning, isn't it? Quote unquote street slang.
Yeah.
Which, let's be honest, Victor Hugo has some issues with.
Yeah.
Issues.
Yeah.
This is the 1,000-yard stare of having to listen to it.
Yeah.
Issues.
Yeah. It's especially frustrating because in his book-long essay on slang, he goes for a good chapter about how every trade has its slang, and how slang is essentially how language evolves. And it's like the one word universal to all European languages, Magnus, which means great, and which the Scots shortened to Mac. The Scottish chieftains shortened to Mac. So you have the great. And then there's this happy little footnote at the bottom. And it's like, Mac actually means son of.
I just...
But, for the rest of this book-long essay, he completely derides, after he understands what the actual purpose of slang is and how it's essentially how language develops. It's a quirk of how languages develop. He basically goes on a tirade of how slang is one of the worst symptoms of poverty, and literally compares the study of slang, like a linguist studying slang, to an entomologist studying a particularly revolting tarantula. And that is a very close paraphrase.
The dude's a snob.
Yeah. he like, for all the props we can give him for trying his best to help the poor, he is a preachy snob.
He's got a little bit of the whole sort of... It's a little bit white man's burden, isn't it? But rich man's burden he's got going on.
Yeah, well, also he has a bit of white man's burden to him as well, with the whole, 19th century Europe is the current pinnacle of civilization attitude that he has. Yeah.
Don't get me started. I'm a historian.
Yeah. But anyways, so, he gets them to go to, to close their eyes, and puts out the candle, and the enclosure is immediately attacked by rats. And it's like, and he explains it to the kids, and the kids are like, what are rats? And he's like, they're like big mice. And he's like, well, didn't you get a cat? The rats ate the cat. And
that just...
Yeah.
That's the rats ate the cat, I think, is possibly a commentary on the way certain political structures play out.
And
it's the guy at the top's all right. He means well, but it's his advisors who are the problem.
Yeah. Well,
it's an analogy for that. It feels like an analogy for that.
Well, and I mean the whole scene of 3 children taking shelter in a in a monument that was put there by sheltering in Napoleon's elephant is very, very much metaphor. Very much reads as metaphor or allegory.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from just being a completely wholesome scene. So, anyways, Montparnasse signals to Gavroche. Gavroche, leaves the elephant, and the 2 children disappear from the narrative for a while. At first, I thought, for the rest of the book, but they do pop up later. So we're going to put a pin in that because there is another rather poignant scene that they're in. And that seems to be like their purpose in the book is just to tug at the heartstrings of the
Everyone.
reader and like sell the message essentially. And so he goes and we jump to Thénardier and his associates who had been caught in Javert's raid. And we get a little mini prison break. But unfortunately, Thénardier somehow gets up onto the roof and then gets stuck trying to scale the prison wall. And we're treated to a somewhat comedic scene where he's hanging, like 20 feet up in the air with his compatriots none the wiser talking right below him. It's like, when is Thénardier gonna show up? He was probably nabbed by the guards. We should beat it.
Yeah.
But then Thénardier finally finds the strength to call out. They see that he's up there. And they're like, who do we know that can, climb up to get him? So Montparnasse, not realizing that Gavroche is Thénardier's son, because 19th century literary tropes, goes and gets Gavroche. And, Gavroche goes, climbs up with a rope and helps Thénardier down. And Montparnasse actually, either Montparnasse or one of the other members of Patron Minette, makes the observation that, hey, doesn't that kid kind of look like you? And Thénardier just kind of ignores the question. And, throughout this, we are interspersed with a few essays on the nature of revolutions and scenes of people just getting ready, like, as the tension is building. And we're so right now we're gonna double back slightly because while going through Marius's thing, I neglected to introduce the Friends of the ABC, which is another pun. It's because Friends of the ABC sounds like the French word for the downtrodden. And like during the Marius, getting kicked out arc, we get introduced to the Friends of the ABC. And and
this book, I just honestly, if you're thinking about reading the book, don't just read the Spark Notes. Seriously.
Or or
so
watch,
much of it.
or just watch the BBC miniseries. Because that does a pretty good job having a concise telling, though it did, cut out some scenes that I particularly found important and poignant. But, like the elephant scene.
Yeah.
It basically does what a lot of adaptations that I've seen do, and just kind of almost completely writes off Gavroche, except for the scene where he dies. It's like, oh, he's, they basically treat Gavroche as, oh, he's the cute street urchin kid that gets shot.
Yeah.
But
he's so much more than that, and that's the one thing I did pick up from the book is Gavroche is really underrepresented in a lot of adaptations.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is due to the fact that this book is a frigging doorstop.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even if you removed the even if you removed all the book-long essays that intersperse the various scenes, you could still get like 2 good seasons out of it. Easily.
And it's one of those, isn't it? I have physically and mentally exhausted after listening to that book and studying it so closely, because it's one of those books. I do not recommend doing what I did and trying to binge it. It won't work.
Yeah, don't.
And listen, I'm the kind of person who can read 4 or 5 books a week when I get going.
Yeah.
I'm the person with a mile-long book. You just look at my bookshelves. They're not all Harry Potter books.
Yeah.
Very few of them actually are. That's a 5-shelf thing, and only 1 shelf's dedicated to Harry Potter. And my gosh, I've got 1,000 books on my Kindle, and none of them, I've never read a book that had me so mentally drained as Limits. And that's not to say it's not a worthwhile book, that it's not a good book, that there's not a beautiful plot line in there, but it's hard going.
Yeah.
And I strongly do not recommend if you're not in a good mental place either.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's not exactly the happiest of stories.
Honestly, the way I recommend going through Les Mis is if you have the attention span to do so. And I will say this won't work for everyone, is keep it as a background book. Just casually make your way through it at your own pace, but don't make it the only book you're reading at the time.
Unless you're on like a 2-week flight somewhere.
Yeah.
It is definitely an airport book. It's a book for when you've got a 14-hour layover on the back end of 2 8-hour flights and delays. And for that, it's great. Also, just do yourself a favor. As I said, the physical copy weighs a ton. Do yourself and your hand luggage a favor. Get it on ebook.
Yeah, get it. Yeah, get it as an ebook. But anyways, so I'm mostly bringing up the Friends of the ABC. Well, one, they're very much instrumental in the barricade plot, and we're approaching that. But 2, it's a very good example of a narrative style that Hugo does, where he'll introduce something, a character or concept, and then he'll immediately pair it with a contemporary French political example and a classical example. In fact, I I'm pretty sure it's Angel Ra, but I didn't try to dig into that chapter. I didn't try and find that chapter in the book to make certain. But I'm pretty sure it's Angel Ra that is, as he's introduced, there's the sentence that he is X and X on, at, at the tennis court, and he is Gracchus on the Aventine. Yeah.
It's there's so many classical allusions in this text.
Yeah.
Gracchus on the Aventine is, I took notes on this, hang on.
Yeah.
Where is it? Because I had to do so. It's, and I'm going to give a trigger warning for this comment because what we're discussing, if you know what Gracchus on the Aventine means, you know what the trigger warning is. If you don't, brace yourself because I'm about to tell you.
Yeah.
The whole point of Gracchus on the Aventine is that he I'm trying to think of a sensitive way to word this.
He's a political martyr.
Yeah, he was overthrown politically, and knowing that he'd lost. Let's say fascist dictators in 1940 Europe like to pull a Gracchus.
Yeah.
At least one specific one did. And so it's a...
Okay, I don't think it was Angel Ra that was compared in that way, because he's more the archetype of the idealist revolutionary, and he's the ringleader of the Friends.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a difference between dying for a cause and dying when you know the cause is lost.
Yeah.
And dying because you don't want to see a world where the cause isn't developed.
True. But
it's a very complex illusion.
What you really, all you really need to know about the Friends for the purposes of this discussion is Angel Ra is the idealist leader. Kufraic is the emotional, like, morale guy. He makes a lot of, like, snide, snarky comments.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yeah. The thing about this is, kind up this book to read. Anyone who's listening to this story knows the plot.
Yeah.
This is not a book you see in a bookshelf and go, oh, that looks interesting, and pick it up.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, there is not, like, it's a famous, work that's over 200 years old, or nearly 200 years old. Everyone knows how it ends.
Yeah.
Everyone
knows the climax. Everyone knows the story. Even if you've never seen it, heard of it, you still know the basic outline of the story.
It's one of those works that spoilers isn't really a thing.
Yeah, it's like saying, spoilers for a Shakespeare play. Well, you've had how many centuries?
Yeah.
It's one of those, and it's so ingrained in cultural ideas.
Yeah.
And you see it repeated, a lot of the ideas repeated in modern media as well.
Yeah.
It is the origin of a lot of rebel story tropes.
Yeah. And and we're just gonna blow quick past. So Marius from Eponine, Marius finds out that Cosette is, finds out Cosette's address, and we have a couple of, we have essentially a book about how they see each other every night in the garden and how they're totally not boning because they're pure innocence. Because 19th century literary tropes.
You put a pair of teenagers in the dark, somewhere where they've got anything resembling privacy, with even the slightest spark of attraction, I promise you they're boning.
Though I will, and of course, because this is the 19th century, Cosette's like 16 and Marius is like in his early 20s.
I mean, I don't really have a problem with the age gap, because Marius might be in his early 20s, but he's an immature man-child.
Yeah.
She's probably more mature than he is. It's a very Romeo and Juliet style thing. She's 13, they're in the 30s, and she's the one who's got the brains.
Yeah. So she does kind of turn into a bit of a... She does come across as a bit of a spoiled brat near the end.
Yeah, I think that, though, is because of the way she was raised, and you can see that, and the culture she was raised in. She's very much a product of her time, and a product of the fact that she's been raised to believe she's this, upper middle class, child. And it does make you wonder that if she just is mentally blocked out her own past.
Yeah. So... And of course, that as we're approaching the barricade, there is going to be a lot of 19th century literary tropes, and of course, we are approaching the topical storm.
Incoming, grab a brolly.
Yeah.
Hunker down. Right, let's go.
Okay. So, Marius finds out that Cosette and Jean Valjean are planning to move to England. Marius has an idea to go to his grandfather, get permission to marry, to hopefully solve the problem that they wouldn't be able to be together because Marius is poor, so he can't afford a passport. I'm
You're paraphrasing. Let's just go with
it. So, he goes. He gets into a row with his grandfather because his grandfather is a crotchety old man and doesn't know how to.
I'm sorry. A row, not a row. A row.
He gets into a row with his grandfather, who is a crotchety old man who can't express how he's missed Marius these couple of years that Marius has been gone. And of course, he gives Marius the advice to make Cosette his mistress. Marius flips out and leaves in a depression because depressed is Marius's current perpetual state of being, because Marius has one personality, and that is depressed. The personality of he has the personality of a wet sponge. So as Marius is leaving in his depressive funk, one of the friends of the ABC run into him, tell him that they've set up a barricade and everything, and the revolt is on. Now, Victor Hugo goes into an essay about what the difference is between an insurrection and a revolt. He says that he defines revolt as a horrendous act that is against progress, and an insurrection is a justified violent uprising.
He's the one who decides what is and isn't justified, though.
Yeah, and his definition of justification is if it's on the side of progress with a capital P. we're going to ignore this can of worms because we're trying to get through.
Just suffice to say, Victor Hugo wouldn't know what a justified insurrection was if one knocked on his front door.
And I will point out that he flip-flops between calling the barricade a insurrection and a revolt. He doesn't settle on one term. So, Marius heads towards the barricade. We have a scene of Gavroche jauntily making his way to the barricade, sassing everyone in his path because he is Gavroche. And that is what Gavroche does, the brilliant little scamp that he is. And
do you hear that sound? That's the sound of my heartstrings like gearing up to be tugged.
Yeah. So we go to the Friends of the ABC, and someone so Gavroche notices, because he had been dressed down by Javert. He had gotten an earful from Javert on certain occasions because, of course, street urchins are going to have their altercations with the cops. He points out that Javert is a police spy, and Javert is captured by the Friends. La Kubac, we don't know who he is. It is hinted at that he may have been one of the other members of the Friends that I blew over because I don't remember all their names, and really the only ones that matter are Kufrik and Enjolras.
Yeah.
He might. I don't think he was the one that was constantly going on about Poland, though. Yeah. Because one of the other Friends had this thing about how all the tyranny in Europe is a result of the partitioning of Poland, and constantly goes on about the Polish plight.
I mean, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
But I grew up hearing that lecture, so I had flashbacks.
Yeah.
On hearing it again.
Yeah. There's one member of the Friends who's constantly bringing up Poland.
I mean, to be fair, Poland has had a garbage 800 years or so.
Yeah. But anyways, La Kubac is either drunk or pretending to be drunk, and points out that house down yonder has a good field of fire, so we should probably seize it and put up a lookout / sniper up there. He goes to the house. He knocks on the door. No answer. He breaks in. The owner and makes his way up to the room that he had pointed out. The owner of the house is in that room, and there is a altercation. La Kubac murders the poor bystander. Enjolras, sees this, summarily, orders La Kubac to kneel and either meditate or pray to make peace with his God, and executes him. Then makes a speech about how we can't let violent actions taint the revolution.
Again, a fair point.
Yeah.
Make an example of him, because that's the problem, and it happens with all revolutions. When the taint of violence, and not necessarily the taint of violence, but the taint of mindless violence.
Yeah.
When you have a revolt or a revolution and there's mindless violence, it disintegrates because it loses the moral high ground. And that's the one thing a revolution always has to have. In the moment, in its context, it has to hold the moral high ground. Otherwise, it's no better than what it's trying to replace.
Yeah.
That's what you should have said, Hugo. See, I can do it in 3 sentences. Why did it take you a book?
Yeah.
Oh.
But of course, Hugo's idea of, having the moral high ground is spreading Western civilization.
Hugo's idea of having the moral high ground is pronouncing your H's and your T's.
But and they find on Lakubak's person a police agent's card.
So he's a plant.
Yeah. Heavily hinting that he is likely a plant.
Yeah, leave the topical warning banner up, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Because given the current situation in America, this is unfortunately a rather topical book.
Oh yeah. The problem is this book will always be topical for one reason or another because it just covers so many themes.
Yeah.
But right now it is incredibly topical. And the problem is that Hugo's opinion is such that I don't entirely agree with the conclusion drawn.
Yeah.
Because I'm a great believer in, sometimes you've got to fight back regardless of what it costs.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make the fight worthless.
Yeah.
Which is not the conclusion this book draws, which is, most people know about this revolt, the students' revolt, because of this book, as opposed to because of the revolt itself, which I think is an incredibly sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
I mean, say what you want, it would be to give people a modern context of what it is. It would be if someone wrote, say, a book about the kids who were there on the day of the Kent State massacre. And in 200 years, no one knows about Kent State, but everyone knows the story of the book. That's just, it's not the greatest outcome, is it? Let's be honest.
And so, Gavroche makes the point of taking Javert's rifle, because his gun didn't have a trigger. Like the pistol he was carrying didn't even have a trigger, which is actually the subject of a pun because he poodle and makes a quip about how his pistol is missing a chien, which is the French word for dog, and apparently also slang for trigger.
Yeah.
So the National Guard attacks, and the friends and Gavroche are working to repel the attack, but it turns out that Javert's gun didn't have any ammo.
Of course not.
And here Marius shows up and actually does something useful when he sees that his friends are in danger.
Marius does something useful.
Yeah, for the one time of this book, Marius actually does something useful.
Way to bring it at the right time, Marius.
Yeah, so he takes the pistols that Javert had given him to fire in the air that hadn't been fired, and shoots the person, shoots the guardsman who's about to bayonet Gavroche. and then shoots another guardsman. And then as the barricade is being swarmed, he spots a barrel of gunpowder and threatens to, and because he's in a depressive suicidal funk because he lost his dear Cosette, 19th century literary tropes, he threatens to blow up the barricade and him, and everyone on it along with him. This causes the National Guard to retreat and Enjolras to declare him as something of the co-leader of the insurgents. And that is the one. This is the one thing Marius does in the entire novel.
In a way, it kind of. If there's one person you expect to do something like that, it's the person who's had a complete lack of agency throughout. Yeah. So it makes sense from a point of view. Because to me, that just, and I need to be careful how I word this because algorithms.
Yeah.
But the lonely, quiet kid who, doesn't really see much for his life, made a few wrong choices and fell in with the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
I can see how you go from that to possibly, one man's freedom fighter kind of scenario here. And it's an interesting take with Marius because he's never given any indication of violence before this.
Yeah.
And
he literally spends like 2 books or so carrying around those damn pistols.
Yeah, so he's not naturally a violent person, but I think everyone gets to the point where they hit a limit. And I think with Marius, a lot of it is, and I'm a great believer in this because I came across it in a strategy book once. The most dangerous person in any battle is the one who's trapped in a corner.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who know they're going to go, and the only thing they've got left is to take you with them. So it makes sense that it's Marius making a threat like that.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with what he's doing because there are certain lines you don't cross, but I can see why he would go that extreme that quickly. It's not beyond the realms of possibility.
And during this altercation, before he, threatens to blow everything up, he almost gets shot, and but a hand comes out of nowhere, blocks the muzzle, and moves it aside. And so after the battle is over and everyone has a round of drinks,
I'm still
here. We learn that the hand had belonged to Eponine, and that the bullet had traveled up her arm and out her back. And because 19th century literary tropes, Eponine had a letter from Cosette that stated that Jean Valjean had moved up the itinerary and they were currently staying at X address and were leaving within days instead of weeks. And of course, Jean Valjean moved up the timeline because he got a note that said, "Leave now." And Eponine was the author of that note.
Yeah.
And Eponine's basically does this out of a spurned lover's revenge. She's, I brought you here. We're all gonna die, and now you have my death on your conscience. And it's too late for you to be with the woman you love. Marius, and through all this drama, Monsieur Mabouf had shown up to the barricade before Marius, and he was just kind of there, not really doing much. Their banner gets shut down, and Enjolras, who's going to be brave enough to replace the banner? Mabouf steps forward. He climbs the barrier to replace the flag, and is shot and dies. And is shot by a hail of gunfire.
Yeah.
And then Marius, so, and it's basically, and then Marius replaces it, and Victor Hugo makes the point telling us that it is symbolically the revolution of 1793 dying and handing it off to the students' revolt.
Mm.
And Mabouf's bloodied, bullet-ridden coat becomes the new banner, and he is put on a table in the wine shop that they're holed up in until proper burial can be given for him. Marius writes a letter, to Cosette saying that he is going to his death. Writes another letter stating, "My name is Marius Pontmercy. Please deliver my body to Monsieur Gilliamond at his address."
Essentially, they're all writing the last will and testament.
Well, Marius, puts his I am Marius Pontmercy, please deliver my body X on his person, and then gives the letter for Cosette to Gavroche, who is a bit peeved because he doesn't want to miss out on the action. Now, everyone understands that they're like when the National Guard comes in the morning, they're probably all gonna die. And at this point, no, actually, it's not at this point quite. Yeah, they a cannon had been brought in and fired at the barricade a few times, and Coufrac spends some time roasting the cannon.
Yeah. Moving on.
Yeah. So, Gavroche runs off, runs into Jean Valjean, who had, because 19th century literary tropes, seen the imprint of the letter that Cosette wrote to, of the note that Cosette wrote to Marius on, in the mirror, because it was on her blotter book, and it was open to that page because convenience. So he goes out, he runs into Gavroche, gets the letter, and then gets his National Guard uniform because he is a member of the National Guard. He's essentially a reservist at this point. And goes to the barricade. Gavroche, not being one to be out of the action, goes on, passes a drunk with a cart, requisitions the cart in the name of the provisional government, even writing out a receipt and leaving it with the drunk. Runs into a squad of guardsmen, uses the cart to plows the cart into the guardsmen and escapes in the tumult. The drunk gets arrested. And
Of course.
and Gavroche makes it back to the barricade in time. The barricade has been getting rather battered by the cannon, and people are drawing lots to find out who should go home and get out safely, because they have 4 National Guard uniforms for people to who have children and such, but because everyone's super patriotic, no one wants to leave. They finally narrow it down to 5 people who will go, and of course, because there are only 4 outfits, the 5 it's like, oh no, devolve to, you go, I'll stay, in a big circle. And then a 5th uniform gets dropped by Jean Valjean.
Of course.
And then Jean Valjean, in a feat of marksmanship, shoots down a hanging mattress, and which deadens the impact of the cannon, because actually that is how ballistics and physics works. Like, that's why ramparts are made out of dirt instead of like concrete. Because a lot of springy material will distribute the force a lot better than compact material. So, and Kufrak says, cracks a joke saying the roar of the cannon is only a whimper now. And they spot a sniper up on the roof. Jean Valjean shoots the helmet off the sniper's head, or not the sniper, the lookout's head. Lookout leaves. His superior comes up. Jean Valjean once again shoots the helmet off the superior's head, and they don't have to deal with lookouts anymore, because and so things are coming to a head. Jean Valjean notices that they have Javert in custody. Marius, because Marius is completely oblivious, doesn't.
So close, Marius.
Yeah. One of the other friends got, captured in one of the assaults, and got killed in a firing, and the friends were, talking about sending out someone under flag of truce to do a hostage swap. The friend gets shot by a firing squad, and Enjolras tells Javert, your friends have just shot you. They're getting low on ammo. Gavroche goes out and starts looting the bodies of the National Guardsmen, and they start, firing at him, and he responds with, rude little rhyming couplets about Voltaire and Rousseau. And
Gavroche and his rhyming couplets, I love it.
Yeah, and they they all seem to miss him. He's just they just can't get him, and then he gets hit in the leg, and he says, I've landed in the dirt because of Voltaire. My nose is in the gutter because of, Rousseau. and he gets hit again. And he starts off with another like rhyming couplet. And then before he can finish it, he's shot and killed.
Mm.
But he did get enough. He did manage to collect enough and get it close enough to the barricade that the insurgents now have 15 more rounds per person.
So.
And they lay Gavroche's body on the same table as Monsieur Leboeuf under the same shroud.
Yeah. It hurts me that the two characters who were most sympathetic in this entire bleeding story,
yeah,
are the ones who die. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
Put some effort into your characters who are gonna live, dude.
Yeah, and then Enjolras, like, who's, sets up their last stand. Jean Valjean's like, hey, I helped you all out, so you owe me something, right? And he's like, yeah, what do you want? And he's like, let me be the one to kill Javert. And he's like, okay. So he takes Javert out, and Javert's like, I knew it'd be you. And Jean Valjean pulls out a knife, and it's like, yeah, you're not one to use a pistol, are you?
Mm.
And Jean Valjean frees him and says, I'm living at such and such an address. If I make it out of here, you have me. And then he fires in the air, and the barricade is attacked. And everyone seems to die a tragic death, including Enjolras making a last stand with, leaning on the muzzle of his broken rifle as a cane and essentially dying by a firing squad. Jean Valjean gets the superficially wounded, but completely out of it, Marius, and brings him down into the sewers. And this is where we get this book-long essay about the sewers of Paris and how Victor Hugo thinks that they're a waste of money and they should put shit nets in the Seine to collect all the poop so it can be used as fertilizer. Because human waste is the best fertilizer ever.
I mean, he's not technically wrong. My local water treatment plant gives out free bags of the stuff, to farmers and what have you. But ew.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, I'm pretty sure your local water treatment plant sterilizes.
Mm.
Yeah, this would be straight up just shipping the shit out to French farms. Because
I wouldn't want to eat the vegetables the following season.
Yeah. Because according to Victor Hugo, all the waste that is just, deposited out into the ocean via the Seine and the sewer system is a waste of millions of francs a month.
Yeah, I think I must have mentally skipped over that bit in the recording.
Yeah. Victor Hugo hates the Paris sewer because of the waste of money. Doesn't stop him
whittering on about it, though, does it?
Yeah.
Oh, he's I think the more you know about this book and the more you read it, the more you wonder why he bothered to write it.
Yeah. And so, Jean Valjean trudges through the sewer. even crossing a quicksand mire, and manages to find his way out and runs into Thenardier, who is currently living in a sewer in one of the outlets, hiding from the cops, and he had actually been chased there by Javert. Because 19th century literary tropes, and everyone's got to come into contact with everyone.
Of course.
Yeah. Thenardier thinks that Jean Valjean had actually murdered Marius and was looking for a place to dump the body. And essentially, Jean Valjean gives up the money that they had on them to get access to the key to leave the sewer, because Thenardier had a key. And then runs into Javert. And it's like, okay, can we get this wounded man, to such and such address, because he had read the note on Marius's body. They deliver him there. He spends several weeks lying in a fever, being doted on by his, grandfather, who had a complete change of heart.
Of course he did.
And then Jean Valjean's like, okay, one last thing. Can I go say goodbye to my daughter? And Javert's like, fine. And then he goes up, and looks out the window, and Javert isn't there anymore. Javert walks to a bridge over a particular point of the Seine where the water is particularly treacherous. Thinks better of it, walks to the nearest police station, writes out a series of notices like, we shouldn't have prisoners await trial in bare feet. It incurs medical costs. Counting broken threads against the seamstresses in the prison, who are working in the prison, is essentially theft. Little things that he had noted in ways that he could improve the lot, that the way that the, inefficiencies that tend to just screw over the prisoners. And then he goes back to the bridge, and he jumps. Because he could not stand to live in a world where he was indebted to a convict.
For me, Javert is, and I'm going to go back to the way he's portrayed on screen and on the stage for this, because his background is incredibly formative.
Yeah.
There's this. Am I right in thinking there was something about he was actually the child of criminals or something?
Yeah, I think so, because I think so. When he's introduced in the book, it's he's likened unto like a wolf dog that is used to hunt wolves.
Yeah,
a wolf dog hybrid that is used to hunt wolves.
Yeah, he's you can see why he turned out the way he did.
Yeah.
And again, this is something Hugo is quite strong at, in that he creates people who are the victims of their circumstances.
Yeah.
And he doesn't shy away from keeping them that way and showing them for exactly what they are.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in that sense, he's got a point.
Yeah.
And with Javert, there's enough fan fiction out there, and I know I would have much preferred if he would have been able to make peace with it, because he could have then actually done something useful.
Yeah.
But this, I think, his character is definitely a study in black and white thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, because the second he's introduced into shades of gray, in the reformed convict Jean Valjean,
He can't take it.
he can't take it and he commits suicide.
Yeah. And it is one of those where it's quite interesting that the one character who is not a prisoner is the one who ends up institutionalized.
Yeah.
And it says a lot about the way the system works and about what it takes to break away from having less than ideal starting circumstances.
Yeah.
And who you have to be and what you have to be willing to give up. So it is. He's a very. I could write an essay on this character.
Yeah.
For me, he's probably the most interesting character in the story. I say interesting, not the best, not the most whatever he is. He's not any of those things, but he's very he's just interesting, and he provokes a lot of thought.
Yeah.
And I think that does say a lot about him and about the world he exists in. And I do wonder how much of that is Hugo trying to make a comment on the things we sometimes expect of people who come from less than ideal circumstances.
Or also possibly just commenting on the unfeeling bureaucratic nature of the penal system.
But that too. But I genuinely don't think it's an accident that he's given that history.
Yeah.
And it says a hell of a lot, and might even possibly not have been what was intended, but it does say a lot.
Yeah.
So it's one of those where you kind of
But so we're gonna rewind slightly and talk about the other rather poignant scene, because it's interspersed in the assault of the barricade. It's a brief little like a palate cleanser, though I won't exactly call it that. So the two little kids end up in the Jardin des Plantes, and they're looking for something to eat because they haven't eaten in a while, and the young kid's talking about how he's hungry, and they wind up hiding near a fountain, near a swan hutch. And a bourgeoisie father and his son are out, talking, and the kid has this brioche roll. And he's talking about, oh, he's not hungry. And the and the father notices the two kids and makes an off comment about anarchy, and it doesn't point out the two kids to his son, but he tells his son to throw the bread to the swans because it is our duty to provide kindness to to the animals. And the swans are out in the middle of the fountain, just kind of swimming about, doing their own business. And he brings, he waves at them, and they start swimming over, and he makes a snide comment how the swans understand the signs, and swans in French is signa. So it's a pun.
Yeah.
And then he hears the sound of the cannon and fire and rifle fire in the near distance, and he's like, let's go back home. And the kid's like, I want to watch the swans eat. And he's like, it's unbecoming to let him eat in peace. And they go, and the kids and the two kids have to fight the swan, like barely get the waterlogged bread before the swans get it. And the older kid, breaks the bread in two and gives the noticeably larger piece to his younger brother, and that's the last we see of the two, heart of the two kids. And
I mean, the thing about this is it is nice that we do get the odd palate cleanser. It's especially with what's to come, we need it. But I just, with these kids, they feel like a side story, which is not fair, because arguably they're more interesting than the actual story.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's this huge build-up. And the problem with Les Mis, which I've always had, is that there's no real plot structure as such.
Yeah.
Like, it's a slice of life story, but there's no real plot. Whose story is it? Where's it going? Who's it telling us about? What's the reasoning behind it? And it feels very, and I'm not one to say this lightly, but it's not a character-driven story, because most of the characters have little to no agency.
Yeah.
Even relatively, they have little to no agency. The only reason we notice Marius has so little agency is because the rest of them have got so little agency.
Yeah.
It's not plot driven, because while they're all very reactive to what's going on around them, nothing that's going on around them is a major spark point for anything. And it just... Honestly, I think Hugo just wanted an excuse to rant about all his pet subjects. This is my theory.
Yeah.
I have to say, I did not.
Yeah, actually, that's... He basically confirmed that in a letter he wrote to an Italian colleague of his. That he basically wrote it to rail about the situation of the poor.
And yet half the time he doesn't seem to be on the side of the poor.
Yeah. And of course, we go back to Marius. Once he's recovered, Cosette is comes to visit. Monsieur Gillenormand has a complete change of heart, and this entire section of the book is basically 19th century literary tropes, the short story. Cosette and Marius get married, and on Mardi Gras, and their wedding train passes through a Mardi Gras parade. Thénardier and his other daughter, Azelma, Thénardier notices Jean Valjean and points him out to his other daughter, Azelma, because Mrs. Thénardier dies in prison, off screen.
Because God forbid that the women who actually had anything to do with the plot have a, satisfying ending.
Jean Valjean comes clean to Marius and essentially withdraws from Marius and Cosette. Marius at this point knows that Jean Valjean, or thinks that Jean Valjean shot Javert, because he knows that the police spy was Javert, because Enjolras told him before the assault. Yeah, he didn't find it out himself. He was told it.
Of course he was. It's Marius.
Yeah, of course he was. Of course it was. Of course it was. He was Marius. Yeah.
When does Marius ever do anything productive?
That one time.
The exception that proves the rule, I think.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite chapter titles is "In which Marius proves his worth by giving his address." But anyways, and Marius does some law work and uncovers that he, and in his casework, discovers that Jean Valjean had stolen money from Monsieur Madeleine, because 19th century literary tropes. So, as this, as Jean Valjean is withdrawing and Marius is passive aggressively driving him away, because he was visiting Cosette every on a nightly basis. On one night, Marius has the servant not light the fire. And then on another night, he has him move, he has the servant move the chairs, to the other side of the room, basically. And of course, Jean Valjean's just, you know me, Cosette. I have my quirks, because they've got to protect the sensibilities of the woman, because 19th century literary tropes.
Dear men, women do not pass out when we see blood.
Yeah.
I promise.
But so, anyways, Thénardier shows up to Marius's study in disguise. Disguised as a diplomat, and Marius sees through it for once in his life.
Oh.
He's like, and he's like, well, I know that your father-in-law is an assassin and a thief. And Marius, thinking that, Jean Valjean killed Javert and stole from Monsieur Madeleine. He's like, yeah, I know it. And it's like, he killed Javert and he stole from Monsieur Madeleine. And Thénardier is like, no, I have these documents that prove that, Javert, the assassin, the one who killed Javert was Javert, and that Monsieur Madeleine and Jean Valjean are the same person. Because, of course, 19th century literary tropes.
Yeah.
And then this is also when Marius finds out that it was Jean Valjean who had delivered him through the sewer. because Thenardier is like, yeah, I saw him, dragging this, this rich Ponzi bloke out to, get disposed of in the sewer. And for proof, I have this piece of his coat. Marius takes out the coat and, matches the piece. And he's like, okay, you at Waterloo, you rescued a colonel. And Thenardier is like, it was a general. Marius is like, no, it was a colonel, you bastard. And it's like, here's 20,000 francs. You get the fuck out of France.
And don't come back.
Yeah, don't come back. And this is of course, the play ends with the Thenardiers setting themselves up as bourgeoisie.
Don't get me started.
But so I did share, or I did image share this tweet, I think in a previous stream. But I will do so again, because this is the bit of spoilers that I was hinting to. So, contact with an evil man sometimes suffices to corrupt a good action and cause evil things to spring from it. So, this is what this quote is referring to. Marius giving Thenardier the money. So, Thenardier goes to America and becomes a slaver.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I was both horrified and not in the least bit surprised that Thenardier would pull something like that.
Yeah.
He really did always seem the type. And had plenty of practice after watching Cosette skivvy around after them all those years.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then, of course, Marius and Cosette get reconciled with Jean Valjean as Jean Valjean's on his deathbed and dies. The end.
The end.
Yeah.
The whole plot is just ugh.
Yeah.
It concerns me because it's a long meandering trip to nowhere. The entire point of this story is that none of these people had any real impact. That's the entire point of the story.
Well, and the entire conclusion is, just a collection of 19th century literary tropes.
Yeah. It's like Hugo went, oh, I've run out of things to rant about. Shit, need to fix this. Need to end the story quick.
Yeah.
And I just, I honestly, I'm so mentally exhausted by this story. I don't have a lot to say on it because it's one of those. I mean, yeah, sure, it's a classic. It's a nice story once you pull out all the essays and the.
Yeah.
But. And the musical will always have a place in my heart, as will any film adaptations. But the book itself, the writing style is atrocious.
Yeah.
The actual composition is, and we can't put this all down to translation. We really can't. But the writing style is just so clunky. He's trying so hard to do this whole, found evidence thing.
Yeah.
And he's just failing miserably because he doesn't understand what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah.
The omniscient narrator does not work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he doesn't really do much. He doesn't really try for the omniscient narrator except during the Waterloo sequence.
Yeah.
And that's more from, and even that's arguably not omniscient because he's attacking it from a historical perspective.
Yeah. But he's just what the way it reads to me is, and I say this as a historian, he reads to me like a failed historian who decided he was going to get his ideas out there no matter what, so he just cobbled them all together into a story and sold it.
Yeah.
Which is a real insult to writers everywhere and to literature.
Well, and I mean, that's technically also what he did for Notre Dame du Paris, aka the Hunchback of Notre Dame, is he wanted to save historical landmarks, so he wrote the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah. I mean, literature as a force for good, yes.
Yeah.
Literature as a form of activism, yes. But Hugo, mate, before you pick you have to know, first of all, what you're fighting for, what you want to say, and how you want to say it before you start. Les Mis honestly just feels like the guy woke up every morning, pulled the first idea that popped into his head, and decided to rant about it for a bit. There's no real structure in this story. It's very obviously the 3-act structure is a very modern concept.
Yeah.
And this story very much belongs in the kind of literary canon that predates the 3-act structure.
Yeah.
By a long shot. It's more like a folk tale, folklore. It's more in the tradition of the classic epics than it is any sort of modern text. The problem with that is that style of writing is very difficult, and Hugo has failed because that style of writing, the historical epics, your Beowulfs, your Iliads, your Odysseys, your Gilgamesh, they're stories with a clear, simple moral message, or they are entertainment value.
Yeah.
And I think, frankly, he fails on both counts. And the problem is he's so preachy, he just detracts from his own story. If he'd just written this as a straight-up story, none of the essays, none of the whining, it would have a much greater impact.
Yeah. Though I will say a couple of the a couple of the essay, like a couple of the chapters in the book long essay about the sewer, I would leave in because it does help sell the danger of getting lost, and it does give some tension.
The book is an excellent historical source.
Yeah.
About the way Paris was laid out, the politics of that era of France. Yeah. Excellent historical source, but there are ways of writing that could do the same job much more efficiently.
Yeah.
And this is very much from a modern perspective as well. Because when you take in a lot of modern media, you grow used to certain patterns.
And a lot of 19th century literature is very long-winded.
Yeah. And predates those patterns.
Yeah.
Because
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea goes off into chapter long descriptions of of the wonders they're seeing.
Yeah, and I mean, even modern fantasy works do not go into that kind of depth about the world. Even Tolkien did not go into the kind of depth Hugo goes into, and Tolkien invented a world.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Some things are just
Tolkien
not necessary.
Tolkien does, but he doesn't do it in the structure of the text itself. He saves it for the appendices.
Yeah. Or he writes it into the. He shows, he doesn't tell. Hugo spends so much time telling, and that's his failure.
And
Don't tell me about the sewers and about how dirty they are. They're sewers. I know that. Show me how this has an impact on your characters.
Yeah. But yeah, and the thing is, like, you don't really need to, like, these 2 episodes are almost like unnecessary because you don't exactly need to try and explore the themes in Les Mis because Hugo tells you.
What I would be interested in reading is an abridged version of Les Mis that's just the plots.
Yeah.
Where and the essays are supplementary reading.
Yeah.
In a separate volume.
Yeah, like
that would work a lot better.
Yeah, like split it out as, like, you know, like have Les Mis as, just the plot, and then have a collection of essays like on the poor.
Yeah. And that would, I think, do a lot more to get the point across Hugo was making. Because the problem is, and this is with all forms of media, if you tell people what they're supposed to take from it, you ruin it. Yeah. People cannot read critically if they're being spoon-fed the critical engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to give people the space to engage critically. And he just doesn't do that because he's too busy. He's so interested in making sure we take the message he wants us to take. He doesn't actually give us space to take any message at all.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
And I think that's a good note to wrap it up on. So, what to do next week as a palate cleanser?
Palate cleanser for next week. Ooh. What do you want to do? Something totally different, preferably short and on screen.
Hit. Something totally different, short and on screen.
Have you done The Princess Bride yet?
No.
Let's do The Princess Bride.
As you wish.
How did I know?
Yeah.
I had to leave that open for you.
Yeah. So, next week we will be discussing The Princess Bride.
Cool.
Now, any shilling?
Yeah, Jeff and I did Asterix and the Cauldron this week. We're doing Asterix in Spain next week, right before Media Musings. Pop along if you're still listening to us and you fancy that. It's usually fun. It's generally wholesome for the most part. So, yeah, pop along. Come say hello. We had a good week this week and more to follow. And everything else I'm involved in, you're also involved in, Ring, so I'll let you do that.
Yeah. So next Saturday, next session of Secular D&D. This Wednesday, I actually have an edited video premiering. Also, next week, Media Musings, we're discussing Princess Bride. And feel free to, like, share, subscribe. Definitely go to Hissy's Hideaway and subscribe. Come October, we should be starting up again on the Storykeeper streams, which means there will be more activity on Hissy's channel. And go ahead, and I think that's... Oh, and next... sometime this week, or not this week, but sometime this month, either the week after next or the week after that, we will be doing Good Omens as my channel pseudo anniversary, because I know it's sometime this month.
Yeah. Yeah, also, Ring, sometime this month, the week after next, maybe the week after that. Yes, that's how months work.
I know. All I know is it's not next week because next week is Princess Bride.
Princess Bride. Cool.
Yeah, one of the media musings this month is going to be Good Omens.
Cool.
And then next month is Lit Month, in honor of Banned Book Week.
Ooh. Interesting.
Yeah. And without further ado, remember, indoctrination is a hell of a drug.
Take care, be good, and if you can't be good, as always, be careful.